You're listening to BFM 89.9, the business station.
But let's talk about internationally. Now, you delivered a paper talking about Veritas' experience going international, but wow, what stands to say? You're like, don't go there until you're at least best of class in your local environment. Don't go there unless you've done your homework. Don't go there until you know your clients. Don't just simply just react to that. So it's got to be going overseas. Has got to be a result of, strategic thinking. Now let's talk about that a little bit.
You've obviously read my last paper. I gave that paper in Washington, D.C. last year. Yeah, I've, gone through it all. It's been 22 years. I've gone through the cycles of ups and downs. And I've seen Malaysian firms adventure overseas. And some of them got burned very badly, including us in some cases. I like to say I've paid a lot of tuition fees to say what I can say.
Right.
And one of the things I always say to young firms out there who may be listening, if you get an invitation or if you get an opportunity to do a project outside the country, don't say no, but think very carefully whether you have the resources to do that. And the resources are many. For example, the first one I think is the right attitude. You have to have a right attitude to venture overseas because it's very different out there. It's not just the food is different. And if that's an issue for you, forget it. Okay? If you're able to converse in other languages, if you have a certain outlook, which is very global, these are some of the resources that you need to have to do that. Financially, you need to have the financial resources. You can't just expect to do it on a shoestring. The people that you send need to be the right type of people, the kind of person that can get along very well. For example, I'll go to China. I was in China last week. I have to drink. If I don't drink, people won't accept me. They won't trust me. So in China, I have to drink. When I go to the Middle East, I have to be very humble. When I go to India,
Which is more difficult, David?
Everything. When I go to India, I have to learn how to shake my head.
Right.
So you really need to understand your client and the culture of the country that you work in. So I would say, don't say no to these invitations. Let these opportunities come, but back them up with careful thinking about how you're going to do it and who you're going to send, making sure that you have the culture to perform in that environment. Otherwise, it is going to be, you're going to be hurt. And then when you're hurt, you're going to think to yourself, oh, the world is a dangerous place. I can't go there anymore. And that is going to be a mistake.
Right. And the other side to that is there's nothing wrong with staying local. There are a lot of architects who are quite willing to stay in Arkansas or wherever it is, right, without going global.
You've obviously read my paper.
In depth.
Yeah, like I said, I have a certain view about where I want to go and what I want to be since I was a kid, and I'm heading that direction. And that does involve a fairly global perspective. Even myself, I'm a kind of a citizen of the world, and that's my playground. But there are a lot of Malaysian firms which I respect tremendously who do fantastic work, and they only think in a local context. That's wonderful. We need people like that. It's just that's not my game.
Right. So do you then look at the industry and say, oh, these are my competitors or these are not? Or you're like, I'm playing a totally different game that's got nothing to do with everybody else. And it's not a question of ego, but I'm just charting my own path. And
we have something what we call our sandpit. Our sandpit, if you recall what it was like to be a kid in a playground and there's a box of sand. Your sandpit is your territory. And we're very possessive about our sandpit. If we see people playing outside our sandpit, which means in projects or areas that we're not going to compete in, we let them be. But if projects are within our sandpit, we start to fight for them. And we'll fight as hard as we can to
So what defines a Veritas project, if you like? I won't say a building, a project.
A project. Well, okay. We look for big. We're big. We want to get big. So big projects are things that we will go for. Projects which are complex. You give us a large parking garage, or we're not interested. Or a large housing estate, we're not going to be that keen. But if it's complex and sophisticated or multidisciplinary or mixed use involving many components like an office tower, a hotel, a shopping center, and other parts, which becomes very big, then we're going to want to be in that space. Any projects overseas that, especially Malaysians, when Malaysians go overseas, we fight for those projects because that's one of our first ways to get into a foreign country is to go with a Malaysian firm. So those are projects will be in our, also projects which require a certain amount of design where clients are very concerned about design and branding and identity. We want to be there. If they don't care what it looks like, we're not interested in the project.
But is that still happening? And you may be doing well in the current economic crisis, but there are other people who think, look, the reality of it is I just need, an entrance to the metro. I don't need the one like in Spain. You know?
Well, if that's what they want, we're not interested.
Right.
We're only interested in clients who want to challenge our creativity. We want to work with people who are going to be like-minded,
So are we going to see from you a Falling Water or Guggenheim or, something that like challenges you?
People always ask me what is my favorite project. And my answer has always been the same. Last 22 years, it's the next one.
It's the next one.
It's the next one. The next one's going to be great. Everything I've done before I'm happy with it. I'm proud of it. But the next one's going to be the best.
Would you do high-rise?
We're doing lots of high-rises.
Well, I know, but I mean, for you, the group in terms of what it's doing, because nowadays people are like, we're going high-rise, but we don't necessarily have the space for you to build around that. And that coming back to Malaysia, what we talked about earlier, there are a lot of people saying there's some beautiful buildings there. The problem is that you can't really see or appreciate them because there's no area around there. It's not standalone per se, but, there are other buildings getting in the way, or there are parts, or that there's a disconnect between one building and everything else. And they're not necessarily followers of Eisenhower either.
Well, for me, a city I think we have to look at buildings in obviously two contexts. The first one is an individual object, okay? And obviously as architects, we think about that object, the beauty of the object and its relationship to the buildings around it. But buildings are also part of a larger thing called a city. And cities are beautiful or cities are not beautiful. And when you say a city is beautiful, what you're saying is the collection of buildings that together create that composition are beautiful. So when I design my towers, I actually see them in these two scales. One is the individual scale, up close, what you would think when you walked up to the building and entered it or looked up at the skyline and appreciated it. But I also think about going way back and seeing the city skyline from UK Heights.
Okay.
And looking at that skyline and knowing that it's gorgeous. And a couple of those little towers in there were things that I added to that skyline. And cities are beautiful or not in that context as well. I'm sure you've seen Manhattan. When you've seen Manhattan from the East River, you see that skyline and you go like, wow. And there's a few things that stick out, like the Chrysler or the Empire State or Citicorp. And you go like, wow. And these are special maybe highlights. But it's that overall proportion of that composition, which you say, wow, that's New York. And you can say the same thing for different cities. And Kuala Lumpur has a beautiful skyline. And I'm proud to have added a few little bits to that.
A little bit, how modest. But adding to the Kuala Lumpur skyline rather than the approach of let's raise everything to the ground and start again.
No, obviously that's not going to happen.
No.
There are parts of Kuala Lumpur that need to be redeveloped. Obviously, Kampung Baru is the key area, and there's already initiatives.
Because there is that economic aspect of